talk about it or know about it. So I started looking for a model where, rather than just making one up, because who am I, but maybe if it's a real world model, it could be applicable to solutions. And I looked at Singapore, but they ended up being a really bad example. I looked at Australia, not a perfect example. Both great water societies. And then I saw what's going on in Israel. And that, if I can go to your question with that, what I saw in Israel is a mentality that puts water at the center of the national conversation. And by virtue of that, by virtue of the fact that every one of the first half dozen of the national leaders had spent time as either a farmer or working for a water utility or working in water exploration, every single one of them came to their jobs with the perspective of how do we fix this. Now, to answer this question about equality and equity, in Israel also, they had a mentality as well. Of course, there's never perfect fairness anywhere. I mean, I was at the end of Israel when you two guys had to sit in the middle because of Sarah. So I would actually like, if I could, suggest that we all change seats every few minutes. But Israel figured out this system, and I won't go into all right here, but I'll just say the culture, the mentality is to make water front and center, to charge a real price for water, to revere technology as a solution, and most important of all, to not think about quick fixes. When the country was founded in May of 1948, and basically, and they were fighting a war for over a year after that happened on every border. But even so, while that's going on, I got a chance to go in archives, diaries of the leaders and so forth. They were already talking about their water system, how to build out their water system, and not for tomorrow, for 30 years forward. And that's the reason why they're able to do what they're doing. And right now, I mean, they've completed their 2050 plan. And they're building against that plan right now. And I think that that is a national model, something that we can benefit from both at the utility level locally and the national level. I just want to say one last word. I'm writing another book about water now, but for all kinds of reasons, we, almost by desire, fail to have a national water policy. The last time there was a national water task force, it issued its report. I read this in my next book. It issued a report in 1973. That's the last time there's been a national water task force. And one would think that with population movements in the Southwest, and the Rust Belt, Flint-like issues with failing infrastructure of a great nation, you'd think there might have been an opportunity between 1973 and now to have a national conversation about water other than in salons like this. And we have not. In Israel, that conversation is an ongoing, rolling conversation. And I want, if I can, and I know about half of you or a quarter of you are getting copies of the book, I want to suggest that it's a model for us. Not that it's a perfect model, but it's a model for us of how we can replicate a mindset and a culture that reveres water, and reveres technology to solve water problems.
Well, when we hear that, realistically, I mean, I didn't want to pick on the spot. Why don't we have an actual model policy? I mean, that was your up to you.
I like Joel, and I don't think Joel's part of the problem. Joel's part of the solution. But it's a big policy question about this area.
Talk about how great Israel is doing everything, how we're such a mess over here, we're so mismanaged. How do we answer that?
I think we have a lot of challenges, and we've got obviously a much bigger and more diverse, country and set of challenges here. And I think, in Israel, the challenge of continuing and looming scarcity, I think brings a different conversation. And we're seeing that in places like California, where I think, if you ask people, is water a thing in California, you probably get a little bit of a different answer than in some places around the country. So I think we've done all right in the last few years at responding to some of the crises that are going on and saying, yeah, we need a national conversation about drought resilience and climate resilience as we see the, sort of the challenges that are unfolding in California and the Southwest. And I think there's been some positive movement, although we got a presidential memo on this, establishing a national drought resilience partnership among the federal agencies and a number of other stakeholders, many of whom are represented in this room. We need to build on that and build momentum I think the challenges that have really been more coming to the fore and coming to light around drinking water are prompting us to have more of a national conversation around drinking water and also around broader issues on water infrastructure and financing of water infrastructure, both drinking water and wastewater. So I think there's, we've got some, sort of anchors or some pillars for a conversation around a national water strategy. We need to build on those and start to bring them together in this one water conversation.
But we could agree that from 1973 to now, we haven't had a full think about national infrastructure. Our wastewater spending is less than 1/10 of what we need to be. So the congressional report, my comment. Likewise, on safe drinking water, we see examples of Flint, where 2,000 communities around America have challenged water. And I think that that's an example of the fact that we're not having a national conversation. We're having a conversation, but not having national conclusions on the idea of saying, this is where we want to drive our conversation, this is where we want to spend our money. You're right about the moonshot point, but it's not just about, it's not just about one issue, it's about several issues. Where a country spends its money, where its leaders spend their mind focus, the number of hours a week that you spend in the Oval Office with the president, those represent what we take as our national priorities.
You mentioned Israel, and you mentioned charging a real price
Yes.
for water, which we all know gets to this question of affordability. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that because Flint, for example, has some of the highest water rates in the country. Water rates are going up as they should, so we can afford some of the infrastructure. But where does that leave? What's your concern with exactly people do?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to put it over here and come back to it because I want to place this entire conversation within the context of that. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot. Many people think many different things we hear, so let me define it as I need. Just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. That's equity. Equity asks what it is we want for all, and then it backs into what conditions we have to create in order to do that. And that's not equality. That you take something like education, if you want all children to graduate and go on and reach their full potential and make a contribution, for some children, a really good public school will be enough to do that. For others, you need a really good public school, you need a community that has support services, you need programs after school and in the summer. So ask what you want and then tap into what you need. That equity agenda is front and center for this nation because you know this. We are rapidly becoming a nation which the majority will be of color by 2044. The majority of babies born in this country have been of color since the summer of 2012. The majority of the young workforce will be of color by 2030. And it's even more intense than what I just said because 80% of those over 65 are white, 46% of those under 18 are of color. So for the rest of your lives and the lives of your children, people who are going to be buying homes, starting businesses, going to public schools, populating neighborhoods will be of color much more than people who are white, and they will be disproportionately left behind. And so we have to be able to finally deal with the problems of prejudice and exclusion if we're going to have an equity agenda for that strong nation. Now I wanted to say that before I say what I say. If that is the agenda for the nation, we can't have an office of equity over in the corner dealing with that. Everything we do has to focus on equity. It has to be baked into everything, including infrastructure, because infrastructure turns out to be some of the biggest money that we spend. And it creates jobs, it creates strong communities, it creates access. So we have to have an equity watch across all things infrastructure, including water. So in California, it's really interesting. The capital trade legislation in California has said that 25% of those returns need to go to communities that are disadvantaged. And 10% of the investments have to be in projects in those communities. And that's so important because where you live is a proxy for opportunity in this nation. It determines everything. Therefore, we have to think about how to make sure that the drinking water is safe. We have to make sure that water is accessible to everyone, but we also have to make sure that the entrepreneurial opportunities that come off of this go to women and of-color entrepreneurs. We need to make sure that the jobs that get created, and there are many jobs, that they get to be counted. Now, people will want to be in the future, but we're trying to figure out how to get them on a pathway to the middle class. And that means something that Sarah and I were just talking about. When you say you're going to have a bunch of jobs, they need to be permanent jobs. They can't be temporary jobs. They're jobs that need to go to people in local communities. And we need to make sure that we're thinking about the communities that need investment most. This notion of affordability just is one piece. And we always have to think about those who are most vulnerable. We always have to think about those who are at the bottom in terms of economics. And we can't let the fact that something needs to be of high quality keep us from saying, and whatever we're invested in quality, it can't be on the backs of those who have just basic needs. We have to figure out a way to find that affordability. Think about that. We do it with food, we do it with housing. Everybody doesn't necessarily have a right to food. We want people to have food. We don't live in a country where you have a right to housing, but we want people to have housing. And we have programs that provide that so that we don't have to make housing free. We just make sure that housing is accessible and affordable to people who need it. So we have to make sure that we're dealing with the basic fairness issues, but let's lift up the equity agenda. It's something that we're pursuing through our water and infrastructure investments, not just in our education and our welfare program.
Except you mentioned earlier about the price of, affordable water. And in Israel, if you're poor, what happens?
Well, let me just actually step back and I'll tell you what happens if you're poor in Israel. But the idea in Israel is that the government does not provide one single penny of subsidy of any kind to any part of the water equation. Not infrastructure, not administration, not water exploration, nothing. Everything is borne by the consumer, every piece of it. Now that has many implications. All of us have that implication. Probably those of us who had a company or organization that paid for our flight down here, we didn't really pay much attention to the price, did we? But if we had to pay for it out of our own pocket, then probably you paid a little bit of attention, maybe even a lot of attention to the cost of the trip. With water. So that if you actually are a stakeholder in the equation, or if water goes from being free or functionally free to being a cost, people pay attention to efficiency. People pay attention to how they use technology. Farmers are vested in the idea of using highly treated wastewater as a source of water rather than fresh water that could be used for drinking water or for the environment. So that creates a whole mindset around the value of pricing water and that cost of water. Also, it all goes into a lockbox. It cannot be used by law for anything other than water and sewage. And it is being spent to make the system always technologically advanced and always coming up with new approaches to be ever more efficient. In the same way that business would be. No company ever says, oh, well, we have enough money now, we can stop trying to make more profit. Every business tries to become more efficient and more profitable. Well, likewise in the water equation. Now, to the specific question you asked, Israel has the mentality as a social welfare state, a modern liberal state, democratic state, that nobody should be living on the street, nobody should go without health care, nobody should go without education. They prefer that people have jobs and pay their own way. But when somebody can't afford housing, just like where I live in New York City, there's a social welfare structure to provide either a full housing subsidy or something adjacent to my apartment building. There's an apartment building that is for very low income people, but they're not welfare. A few blocks from the area where I live, it's exclusively people on welfare. So there's different gradations of government support. Likewise in Israel, housing, food, and water. The problem in America frequently is you get your water from the utility, and the utility is not permitted to charge variable pricing. So that discriminates not by intent, it's not intentional discrimination. But it's de facto discrimination. And so what happens here is people say that in America get food stamps or its equivalent. In Israel they get water stamps, or water certificates by which they can pay a portion of their full price water bill. The same way they get a housing subsidy or a food subsidy or a clothing subsidy.
Realistic in this country at all, and we're not, it's two different situations.
Well, I think that a lot of these decisions really ultimately are going to be made at the state and local level here in the United States. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to really, we've been working with utilities and communities around the country to try to highlight the diversity of models of customer assistance programs that exist, at least to try to daylight and provide some momentum on this affordability question. I totally agree with Angela that there's a lot of dimensions to this issue. It's not just sort of rates and affordability per se, but that's one area that we can focus on.
But Sarah, I thought your question was a different question. Maybe you still gave the answer you intended to the question you intended. And you said, is that realistic? I thought you meant something different. I thought you meant is it realistic that we can never evolve towards a full price model?
Yeah, well,
That's right, that's right.
Do you think,
Because
do you think
I think that's the more important question. I think that's the more important, and do I think we can depending upon how the culture gets written. If we think of water functionally as something akin to sunshine or air, which is limitless and free, or nearly limitless and should be free, or subsidized heavily, or it's entitlement, then I think that we'll never get there, of course not. But if we have national leadership and local leadership that explains to people the fact that to have a first world water system at a time when our water system is good, but not what it was 50 years ago, then we can get to a great place. But we're gonna have to get to a very great place by virtue of a changed mentality from a rain, go away, come again some other day to a, hey, it's raining, that's good news, now we do that water.
Right. Let's talk about just strategies, and we were talking a little bit about this, but let's pin them down on what we do. To elevate water as number one, one of the top issues, even the top 10 issues that is on people's agenda. What's the EPA's, the agency's best idea for doing that? What do you think is number one smartest idea? These people need advice.
Well, one thing I would say is actually, and I think there was polling, Gallup did some polling on this earlier this year, and when you ask people what they care about in terms of environmental issues, and we can have a conversation about where environmental issues are in the stack of people's overall issues, actually water is right there. Drinking water contamination and contamination of our lakes and rivers are the number one and number two issues that people care about, ahead of climate change, ahead of air pollution, ahead of toxics, ahead of nuclear waste. So I think there actually is there is people that inherently do value and care about this. But there is this tension, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, between the local manifestation, the variety of ways that water challenges manifest themselves at the local level, and it's inherently local characteristic of it, and the fact that at the same time we want to be motivating this national strategy and national conversation around it. So, we need to figure out how to do a better job at what you've talked about, Sarah, in terms of, I need to be able to talk thematically about national strategic issues, but I need to be able to make that real for folks in their local areas. So I think we are in a concerted push on that in the drinking water area right now to try to hand off an agenda to the next administration that will elevate drinking water safety and how we invest in infrastructure and face those challenges to a top tier issue for the next administration. But we really would like to be able to do that in a lot of areas across the water agenda, in the clean water agenda and source water protection, and thinking about how water can be a centerpiece of urban revitalization and community development, because that's happening all over the country. We just need to find ways to lift that up.
I was going to say to Angela, you've worked a lot at the community level. So maybe this isn't something that the federal government would be very good at, or maybe this is something that has to come from the grassroots up.
The federal government needs to be good at it, and you need to begin, because this is a national issue. And when you talk about how we move the agenda, one of the things that you don't realize as a nation is certainly the people who would care most about the environment in terms of political activity do not embrace this notion that the people who are most likely to vote for anything that is good for the environment, people of color. Overwhelmingly, Latinos and African Americans and Asians vote in favor of things that have to do with the environment because it's in their faces, they've got skin in the game. They just hit them first and worst. Therefore, we need to be thinking about how to talk about these issues in ways that engage these communities, because it's going to control what happens going forward. We have to disaggregate this problem, and we have to put it back together. People really do care about water, and I think we're going to see a lot more focus on water going forward, because it just keeps coming at us. It's floods, it's flints, it's one thing after another. People need to put that together and understand that that is part of the system And they will have different things that they will focus on in their local communities, but we need to have a national conversation, we need to have a national strategy, and we need to align local strategies and local decision making to the needs of the people in those communities, not just for what people want to work on, but what they need to work on, because they need to understand what's going on in their communities and engage those people who can have real voice. I want to just emphasize, a friend of mine has written a book called Brown is the New White. And what this book is about is the shifting demographics into politics and looking at how the changing electorate is going to control what's going to happen in years to come and what we need to do in the way we frame issues, the way we talk about issues, so we engage the people who are going to have tremendous impact on what happens and get people educated, get people informed. It's no accident that the places that are forcing this nation to have the conversation it does not want to have about race and inclusion and equity are places that if you don't live in those places, you didn't know about. Ferguson in Missouri. If you think Missouri, you don't think Ferguson, you think St. Louis. Flint in Michigan. It is these declining inner ring suburbs where we're pushing people who are vulnerable out of cities that are coming back into communities that are in decline, and we're seeing that the national issues are coming to us from these marginalized places. They may be marginalized places, but the people we're talking about are people who, in aggregate, make up the future of the nation. Water, police, racism, all of these issues are coming forward. We've got to put it together.
It seems to me that part of this is the way that the issue is framed, and we struggle as reporters. We've struggled with this at Marketplace. And when people my editor came to me and said, let's do this series on water, I remember the first thing I thought, oh gosh, how can it be that interesting? And we're, sorry.
Yeah.
And very often the way that the industry presents the issue to us comes off as an engineering issue or a technical issue, something that, I'm not sure I quite understand. I don't think my audience will listen to me for 5 minutes on that. So when we thought about doing our series, we tried to find a common thread through all of these different water sources of popping up, and that's how water conservation came up. We did it through the lens of price. And one thing that, I'm just thinking aloud here, is that water's an economic issue, right? I mean, if you frame it not as an engineering or technical issue, obviously infrastructure, but as this is what we depend on for healthy economies, this is our future. I learned this because I did a story for that infrastructure series. In Los Angeles, they did something very smart. They came up with something, I think it was in 2008, called the shakedown scenario, or people from LA can tell me. And it was all about what would happen, what's going to happen. Let's tell a story about what's going to happen when the big one hits. And part of that story was what would happen to the water infrastructure. And as a lot of you know, a lot of the water supply into Los Angeles comes from the Way. It crosses the San Andreas Fault. I actually found the spot 50 miles north of Los Angeles where the San Andreas Fault crosses the California Aqueduct. It's not hard to people. And what would happen if a huge earthquake hit? And then after that, I went out and interviewed this scenario, this study, talked to business owners in Southern California, in greater Los Angeles, and asked them, what would happen to your business if you lost your water supply for 6 months? Well, it has a huge, people would leave the city, they wouldn't have jobs, it has a huge economic effect. And that story was that resonated with our listeners and people around the country. So in some ways, I think it's a way it's how you frame the issue.
So I'd like to answer what I think is the biggest issue also, but I'll just say in terms of storytelling, I was as shocked as anyone that my book had the success that it did. I mean, I'll tell you candidly, when St. Martin's Press bought my book, their initial plan was to print 1,500 copies. And here it is 9 months later, it's still on bestseller lists around the country, and I'm shocked by that. By the way, every penny of royalties is going to charity, so I'm not to say lucky that. Okay. As my wife said, you were a big shot, and when you throw 1,500 copies saying you're giving all the royalties to charity, it's a different story now. and then we started getting international offers. There were like 30 countries in the world the book is coming out in now. It's like, my wife says, did you mean like every edition or just the US edition? So anyway, but I think part of the reason is that if you tell the water story as an engineering story, you are going to have a fairly small audience. If you tell it as a proxy for larger societal forces in the sense that you are, I mean, I didn't pick up the equity issue quite the same way you do, although I do, in part in terms of water as a global need and fairness for developing countries, not the US alone. But it's a proxy for a society and its ability to have a vision. A proxy for the idea of good governance versus bad governance, laziness versus proactiveness. And so that was how I framed the book. So although the book is quote unquote a water book, it's really not a water book at all, in my view. It's a book about society and how society challenged itself to achieve greatness. Ironically, I will tell you, when the book came out, I was first-time author, I was all excited. This is man, I'm a writer. I went to my local Barnes & Noble to see, so I go in, I go to the information desk, go to Barnes & Noble stores, and I said, I'm there with my son, and I say to the information desk person, tell me, I heard there's a great new book out here called Let There Be Water by this author, Seth M. Siegel. I said, could you please tell me, where do I find it? And the person, looks into the computer and says, it's upstairs on Wildlife. And I went upstairs, and sure enough, it was upstairs on Wildlife. And I have morning, and I said, can you call Barnes & Noble? It's Wildlife. What the hell is it doing in Wildlife? It's a water book. And it turned out they don't have a water section. So there's budding authors in this audience, please write more water books. We need a water section. Okay, should I answer the most important issue? Or
Yes.
I'm too long already. Okay.
Yeah, that was fine.
Okay, my answer to the most important issue, aside from price, because I think price will drive all the other decisions, is I think we need to also reform agriculture. And reforming agriculture, we address water quantity, not just water quality, but water quality too. By reforming agriculture, we touch many issues, including equity issues that Angela's raised. By 70 to 80% of our nation's fresh water goes to agriculture. It has all kinds of implications. By virtue of the fact that we are over fertilizing the fields, by virtue of that, we are hurting our waterways with nitrates, and we are creating all kinds of problems. By virtue of the fact that we are over pumping our aquifers, we are introducing arsenic and other toxins and other heavy metals into our water supply. And just to go back to the Israel example, Israel is a country that invents drip irrigation. It's now illegal in Israel to flood irrigate a field. And the virtue of changing our model of irrigation, and thinking of the agricultural structure, integrating into our thinking about our domestic water and our cleanliness of our water, is really something that is missed. And I think, in Joel's world, he deals with something. Then there's the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior. And to some degree, we balkanize the water story rather than unify.
And it is happening in California, but it's not mandated, and probably.
It's not mandated, no, but
it's happening.
But there's an equity issue as well. The wealthy farmers all have adopted drip irrigation and micro irrigation across the board. I just came back from a tour of the Imperial Valley and San Joaquin Valley. Spent time from treasure to the field to the farmers and so forth. There was some reporting for the book. And then you go to poor farmers. They can't get credit for the beds. And these are disproportionate people of color and women. And in fact, they don't even own the land, they rent the land, they want shared properties, they always have. And they can't get access to micro irrigation equipment. So they flood irrigate their fields because the water's available. So that's what I'm saying, it's a whole dynamic. By figuring out how to fix the water equation, alfalfa and cotton in California are not drip irrigated, they are flood irrigated.
Let's get this issue of short-term thinking, which I was saying is like it comes up in every story I do on water, which is no one wants to think 10 years ahead. Political terms are only, a certain amount of time. Somebody yesterday said something about, well, that wasn't going to happen because they couldn't like cut a ribbon on, you know, a new water tank or something.
The mayor can't take credit for it.
Right. So how do we get it at that, that point?
Well, I mean, at the local level, I think one of the biggest challenges, if you talk to, and there's a lot of utilities represented in the room, I think folks will say, yeah, this is, you know, if you want to get, you know, good action on clean water and safe water, you need investment, and to have investment, you need to have, you know, steady rate increases over time in order to, you know, address those challenges, and you need to have it in a smart way that accounts for the equity considerations. And there are a lot of places that have figured out how to do that well across the country, and a lot more that have not figured it out.
What's the best way? What's the best?
You know, I mean, I've heard from a number of utilities, and there's folks in the room who know a lot more about this than I do, but who have at a moment in time had that automatic steady increase baked into their rates over time, and just the freedom that gives for better asset management and more prospective management of systems. I mean, this is kind of boring stuff. It's not, you know, it's not the fun stuff that's probably going to go in set a new book, but it's really, really important. So, you know, figuring out the political will at the local level. And again, I feel like it keeps coming back to this question around we need to get better at communicating and being more honest about what is at stake in terms of the risks, because we always want to have a fun conversation about the nifty new technologies that we can adopt, and that's a really fun conversation. It's great. There's a huge amount of economic opportunity there for innovation in the sector, but I think folks are very reticent to talk honestly about what's at stake in terms of risk. We've got to find a way to say we've got one of the best drinking water systems in the world, but if we don't get serious about investing in it and paying the price of water and accounting for these equity issues in communities that are falling behind, we are not going to continue to be one of the best water systems in the world. So,
I think part of the long-term problem, the absence of long-term thinking, is that we don't have a narrative that we're telling ourselves as a nation and gives us any confidence about thinking long-term. I think you did, Sarah, when we talked about the economic dimensions, because part of the angst and fear that's going on in this nation right now, we know it is, it's in our faces, is that people feel economically insecure and they don't know what to do about it. We need to start telling the American people a story about its future that includes the things that have made it great. People talk about wanting to go back to when things were great. Things were great potentially when we were investing in the infrastructure. That things were great potentially when we were thinking about what we're going to need in the future and how do we lay a foundation for people to be able to get here, like the GI Bill. When the GI Bill first came out, people thought, oh, more than 100,000 veterans would take advantage of it. And more than half of the 16 million did, and it made the middle class. Then if we start telling people a story about the future that is dependent on an infrastructure that includes water, it includes transportation, it includes broadband, we get that infrastructure right, and we lay out the path to the future in which everybody can get on it. And that way we'll stop pushing people to the side and thinking we have to build walls to keep them from getting what is ours. And we can create a way that what is ours is something that gives plenty of it to go around. It's not a zero-sum game if we really bring in everybody. For example, I was talking about how we come to this nation of people of color. If right now we were able to create equity in income for people of color and people who are white, and I think everybody makes the same thing. I mean, as a role, we get it. GDP would be $2.1 trillion higher. I mean, it's just, if you get equity right, you get everything right. So I think we need that story, and we need the people to see themselves in the story. I'm glad that people are in the Latino and the women and the Asian farmers who don't have access to the water that they need, they don't have access to the technology that they need. On Indian reservations, 13% of the people living there don't have access to safe drinking water. So this crosses the board. The people in Appalachia who are suffering from the same thing. This is an American problem. It's not an isolated problem. We have to get this right along with other infrastructure investments. And then we create a way to let our shoulders come down to understand that we're working on the problem that the children will not do as well as you have. We're not just going to live with that. We're going to work on it. We have to work on it with investments.
just want to say, I second what you're saying, but I want to take a different angle. And I'm on Twitter, sort of somewhat obsessive tick I have now. But one of the things I like to tweet most about, if any of you on Twitter says I'm seeing, feel free. But one of the things I like to tweet most about is the fact of the disconnect between confidence in government and our policies. And so that I think that one of the easier ways for us to rebuild confidence in government, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, every one of my friends, everyone I talk to is dispirited right now. And dispirited not just because of the political campaign and the choices, but dispirited because many of us, again, not usually a good guy, but many of us, fairly or unfairly, have begun to feel this sort of despair that the problems are too large and the government can't solve our problems. And I argue, again, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, there are solutions. But the most important of all is to get back to a unified public confidence in the idea that government can solve problems. One of the sweetest ways of doing that is in infrastructure generally and in water in particular. Because by giving people a confidence that the water they drink is safe, that the government is thinking about them in a smart and futuristic kind of way, people feel pride. And not to make everything about the Israel experience, but I see this in Israel. I mean, people there are very proud of the security apparatus, they're very proud of the military, everyone serves in the army there, but they're also immensely proud of the water system in a way that you'd never think of here in America. I've been taking taxes off to this interview and that interview, and I speak media for Hebrew, and I engage with taxi drivers or people on the bus or whatever, and it's amazing. Everybody, the bellman who took my bags with priority, everybody knows about the water story in Israel. It's a source of pride, national pride. So I think that that's something that we can try to build towards here as well. That's part of the culture I talk about.
Yeah, and the last time I did that was probably Uber Jam.
Well, as the government guy, I'll say something counterintuitive, which is I actually think, I see the point that you're making, Seth. I actually think if you look at the gnarly kind of water problems or challenges and opportunities that we have in this country, I'd actually say the opposite, that the government is not the main solution. The government can help lead a conversation and spearhead a convening, but it's actually partnerships that are going to get at these problems. I mean, you talked about some of the challenges around agriculture, both in terms of water scarcity and water pollution. Those are problems that are not going to be solved or really effectively grappled with in a sort of a centralized top-down government-led kind of way. There's got to be partnerships that bring in a really diverse set of stakeholders, and I know you agree with that.
I agree with that. Someone's got to set the rules of the road. It's not going to be in this room. The rules of the road are going to be set by government, and smart government policy that's futuristic and looking over the horizon, and it absorbs the idea that there's a business partnership to it, there's an NGO piece to it, and there's also lots of pieces of technology. Why isn't there we have technology in every other part of our lives, and we embrace it the same way in our national infrastructure, particularly in our water? We're still mostly in a late 19th century model. Why is that?
You're like a water infrastructure tax, like a gas tax. That's not our future.
It's an interesting conversation. It's a conversation that a lot of people want to have. I don't know that that's what we should be waiting for in the current, sort of national political conversation. If we're waiting for that to happen as the way that we're going to make progress here, I'm a little bit worried about that conversation. I think we got to get going, and we got to be. We need to be looking out and making incremental progress, looking at the partnerships and where innovation is happening. Integrated innovation that goes across the financing, management, inclusion, technology, and science and information. We need to be looking at those examples and holding them up and trying to, encourage all of us to be driving towards those examples. And I really do think that, the partnerships and the bottom-up innovation is going to be a big part of that, which is not to let the government off the hook. We have a big role to play there.
I think one example is, again, the Israel example. In Israel, the government pays a bonus to utilities that use new technologies. The way they do that is they partner with entrepreneurs, companies, crackpot ideas that sometimes change the world. And they bring it to a utility, and the utility uses it. They assign an engineer or two to work with this entrepreneur. The idea works, the entrepreneur owns his business, now he's a global company. It's happened again and again. There are 300 Israeli water technology companies that have put born at this model. And then, if they fail to do this, if the utilities fail to do this, the government actually can levy a penalty against them for failing to innovate enough. Our model here is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? And that's the mentality.
And it is broke, don't
And the
fix it.
utility- The mentality is that the utilities have a rate commission that's a rate, and there's not part of that rate for like futuristic thinking. It's like, it's price, and it's not about innovation and making great worse.
Yeah, I just don't think it's binary, and we have to.
You're right.
Right, and so I don't, not to dismiss that, but if you take the infrastructure finance piece, for example, we can have a conversation about what's the overall, sort of federal investment here, and that's an important conversation to have. But we can't do that to the exclusion or the neglect of thinking about whether we can make the dollars that we've got work smarter and harder than they are right now. And there are a lot of opportunities in the mechanisms that we have, like the state revolving funds, which is the main way that the federal government invests in water infrastructure. There's a lot that the best are doing in terms of leveraging those dollars that others are not yet doing. And so we need a conversation around how to expand those best practices. We need to be thinking about how peer-to-peer partnerships can bring us up to a scale in the way that we're investing and managing in our water infrastructure that's actually going to be sustainable. A lot of the biggest problems that we have in water infrastructure around the country are not about the availability of financing, of infrastructure financing. It's about the ability of systems to actually have a scale and a rate base to support those investments in a way that's smart and is going to be sustainable over time. So we really need to, even as we have these conversations about expanding the pie and all that, we need to keep after trying to make these dollars work smarter and harder.
We're going to take audience questions in just a moment. I didn't want to pose the campaigns and politics has come up here. So I just want to end on a political question. What do you hear when you hear the candidates talk about this? Do they get it? I mean, if Hillary and Donald and Bernie for now were here, what don't they know that they need to know? And I'll start with you.
No. Right. I have to be tempered in responding to a question like that. I heard recently that maybe there's not actually a water crisis in California, and that was a surprise to me. But in any event, I think that. Certainly on the Democratic side, the way that that Flint came to the fore in the campaign shows that folks get that there's a critical, equity issue and ties to broader development, and social equity issues that absolutely need to be tackled in this country. So I think there's a consciousness of that. I think that infrastructure investment is always something that's popular, in the abstract, and people want to be for that. And then the question is, okay, how are we going to make that real? So again, I think as we try to, we need to stay focused on addressing the individual challenges that exist and getting where we need to get on Flint to make sure that people have safe drinking water. Both there and a number of other communities where there are challenges. But we do also need to see whether we can capitalize on some of the energy intention around that to sort of say, yeah, this is a big deal. This needs to be a national priority for the next administration.
And what about your Hillary and Donald and Bernie who sitting out in the audience and give you a chance to say what you want to say?
I think we have a real opportunity to make this an important issue. There are enough people who are being touched by it. And if we're working with communities across the country, if we're working with people who are hosting debates, if we're working with journalists who are going to be asking those questions, we can push the candidates to talk about this, and we can push them in very specific ways. I do appreciate it. Yes, we have to make sure that people get that there's real suffering and they're addressing that, and we have to have systemic, big responses. I want to go back to the examples I was using before about the the highways and the infrastructure and the GI Bill. But the reason that those things have not held as ways to drive a really strong economy is because they were not inclusive. If they had been inclusive, we would be in a different place. So this question of inclusivity, GI Bill, that most Black people could take advantage of that. The infrastructure investments did not stay focused in transportation on making sure people can stay connected to economic opportunity. So we have this mismatch between where would-be workers are and their jobs are. So we got to bring all of that into this discussion. So we don't allow people to have a fragmented discussion. You got to jump off of what people are interested in, but you have to take it into a bigger discussion. I think it's going to be up to us as we go through these next months to put this issue out there, but not to allow it to get separated from what the country cares about, what the country has to care about. So, yes.
So I've been either contacted by or in conversation with all three of the campaigns. Bernie campaign, Hillary campaign, Trump campaign, about water issues. And this is just impressionistic. My feeling is that none of them are at the level of urgency or sophistication that you would want. I think it's good that all three of them are interested in the subject matter. And I don't want to over-characterize conversations. I think some of these are private conversations, but I think that the idea of becoming part of the national conversation, I wish you were right that it happens soon. I don't know that it'll happen now, but I do think it'll happen someday soon. On the way down here, on the flight down here, I had the opportunity to read the 2012 Democratic Party platform. And I was curious to see what role water played. And water is mentioned a handful of times in the document, but in no way is it focused on as a national issue. Again, I don't mean to oversimplify it. I mean, it's definitely mentioned, but it's not mentioned in the way that any of us in this room would assume that it's such a gravely important issue would be mentioned. And I would dream of the day, and I said this to all three of the campaigns, I would dream of the day when water has as much mind share as energy does. And here's a test. I'm a New Yorker, so I read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times every morning. They deliver to my front door in my apartment building. And I've noted how frequently it is that there's an energy story on the front page of either of those newspapers, and how rarely, almost non-existent, there's a water story other than the water crisis. And I think that when the day comes that it's sort of like part of the evening news, water stories, then we're part of our news magazines, then that's the day we'll know that we've achieved something great. I don't think that's 100 years from now. I think it's soon, but I don't think it's the time of this campaign. I think that, and the final thing I would say is, one of the campaigns, again, I don't know which one, we had a fascinating conversation about the foreign policy implications of bad water policy. We're not spending enough, perhaps, on our foreign aid to water projects around the world. We're not directing the World Bank, spending water money properly. And this has implications as water problems here are somewhat. Water problems in the developing world are deep and profound. And if you think that we are ready for a humanitarian crisis of the magnitude of large population centers running out of their water, and this is a U.S. foreign, but I just want to not ignore foreign policy, then we are not really ready for this. Not from our State Department, they mean well, not from the World Bank, they mean well, not from the United Nations, they mean well, but no one is focusing on the brand new paradigm of water refugees that could be the tens of millions and greater hundreds of millions.
On that note, let's take some questions. We've got about 15 minutes. So where's the microphone? Who next? Here in the back.
Hello.
And is anybody who state your name and what organization you're with?
Yeah, I'm Roger Wolf. I'm one of the farmers that was referred to agriculture, right? It's called food reform. Just wanted to share the perspective that agriculture understands that there are parts. Agriculture can be a provider. The U.S. Water Alliance understands that agriculture has to be part of this. And you think about all these water issues, these are local issues. Action happens locally. Partnerships are going to be required. And I hope one of the messages that you send back to the candidates is that agriculture is fully committed to being part and a provider of solutions to these water quality challenges.
I hope you're right. I've been traveling the country very aggressively since last October. I feel like I have the opportunity to have a stage because this book, it gives you an opening. Let's hope we've got 170 audiences in 50 cities, 20 states now. And I try wherever I can to speak to farmers. Again, because it's also the focus of the next book. And I think that you are right that farmers are acutely aware of water because nothing happens without water on the farm. But I think it's a very mixed bag as to their understanding and agreement to adopt technologies. And I think that this is a place where the government can play a very large role in helping them to jump into smarter uses of irrigation and better forms of extracting water that could ensure a better future both for them and for people who are downstream and downriver who deal with the nitrates and other things that come out of their water. But I think you're right. I think farming has to be integrated with this, and I think it's telling how often it is that we have this conversation about water and agriculture and farms are never part of the conversation at all. And I applaud you for doing all you can to make this a unified conversation.
Which is sort of crazy because it's 80 in California, it's
80%, 79.4% of their water goes for agriculture.
Ted Hefner, I'm a utility person from Hampton Roads, Virginia. And it was a great panel, by the way, excellent. I've had the opportunity to go to Israel, visit their water innovations. It's been great. You know, Israel was sort of them against us as a nation, and they don't really have a water supply, and I think it unified them on a national water policy. Do you really think that, and I haven't read the book yet, I'm planning to go get it, and I'll go up to the wildlife section of Barnes & Noble.
Or by the way, you don't have to leave the ballroom, go right to Amazon. So else is go to charity.
But do you really think that our nation founded sort of on the rugged individualism that doesn't sort of have that? When I was in Israel, I agree, everyone knew about the water issue, but it has a very different feel. Israel is a country, and it is a them against us, and they're very unified now. Like, you really think the U.S., you know, very rugged, individualized country can really come together on a policy like that?
Well, you didn't spend enough time in Israel if you think it's all a unified place. But it is an elbows out. It's an elbows out. You're screwing me. I want my share. Society, as much as, or I would even say far more than America. What is true is that they are able to say, because they've been trained culturally, to say that where things are for the common good, that we are prepared to stand together. And the case has to be made. The case had to be made and has to continually be made that in the water sphere, the water sector, banding together produces a better outcome. Right? And so I spoke to people across the ideological and economic spectrum in Israel, and they have all kinds of views about privatization and society, but it's unified the idea that we are going to have a disaster if we don't unify around water. So they look, including people who lived in America and were scholars at Stanford and other major American universities, they look at the American model and they shake their head. They say, how many separate water authorities are there? About 150,000, something like that?
Public water systems.
150,000. Now, Israel's obviously a much smaller country, a different watershed and all that. But, oh my God, why can't America get something unified? I think it's a culture change. I don't think it's about rugged individualism. It's about thinking about new forms of governance that fit our current reality. The rugged individualism made sense in the West when there was lots of water and very few people. Now there's not enough water, but there's lots of people, and people have to start thinking about the new paradigm. And I think that's what leads to a new cultural structure. And look, I think we'll get there. I really do.
Hi, my name is John Hickert. I'm the mayor of Wisconsin. Glad to have you here today. For a moderator, I want to ask that the press continue to push the candidates on this issue and literally push them to an answer. Because I think it's imperative, as we've talked about it, it's imperative that we have a national agenda on infrastructure, specifically on water. Transportation is a whole other topic that's disruptive and craziness, but water is imperative, and you see that out in Flint, like Toledo or everywhere else. But do you think that there is capacity for us to have a national water agenda, given number one, the Congress that we have, number two, the political climate that we have, number three, the situation that we have? In Wisconsin, we just have had a governor who completely deregulated high capacity wells. So we have
Say that again, deregulated.
Deregulated high capacity wells. Basically says to farmers, we're pulling the regulation out of the DNR in Wisconsin. Add that. There are tens of thousands of lakes in Wisconsin, and people are concerned about the lake levels that are dropping this way. So when you have decisions like that in Wisconsin that are really disastrous for our state, is there capacity for this country to create an agenda for the country on water?
If you're asking me, I mean, I can only speak for how the media is covering it. And I know that this election, there's a lot of, this is coming down to sort of like a character, what's being covered now is character instead of policy. All I can say is what's worked for us, at Marketplace. We have the luxury of doing long-term projects like this serious water hydroxygen, like this weak lake. And we're given a long period of time to do these things, to do travel around the country and do multiple stories and make connections and find common themes. And if all of you just keep that in mind when you're dealing with the media, because I know we tend to like to go for this, for this, for this. And if you can help give context to the media when you're talking to them, especially historical context, that's really important. To not just say this is happening today, but here's why. Here's the why. That helps a lot. I
just want to say that about Wisconsin. I mean, I don't think it's all bleak coming out of Wisconsin. For example, Wisconsin, I think, is leading the nation in showing how you can use business solutions and technological solutions. They're building out a phenomenal water center headed by a not-for-profit organization, not a charity, but a not-for-profit business development kind of concept. It's aggregating global water companies and water technology companies in a once upon a time horrible part of Milwaukee. Likewise, the University of Wisconsin has a School of Freshwater Sciences right on Lake Michigan and in Milwaukee, which has some of the, I think, the most profound thinking about what's being done about freshwater generally and Great Lakes watershed in particular. So I know that there's an ebb and flow of policy, governors come, governors go, but academia and business structure and NGOs seem to be the part of civil society that I think is really what drives the long-term view of how we address water and our other issues. So I think there's a lot of actually very exciting things coming out of Wisconsin right now.
I was just going to add one more thing, and this isn't, I think a lot of what's been said makes a lot of sense. Another dimension of this that we haven't talked about much here this morning is just the role of water, access to water bodies, green infrastructure in community revitalization and urban revitalization, community development. There's kind of like this secret kind of trend, going on around the country where if you look at, and I used to work in the smart growth world and now working in the water world, it's remarkable to look across the country, and I know many of the folks in this room represent communities where this is really happening, and you've gone to visit, projects here in Atlanta. It's remarkable the degree to which organizing around dealing with water challenges like stormwater and wet weather events and flooding, and or capitalizing on a local water body, the river that we used to turn our backs to, that we're now, making a centerpiece of urban revitalization, is becoming kind of a centerpiece of community development and urban revitalization. And that's happening all over the country in a lot of different places, and we need to kind of tell that story as well, because I think that really gets to the economics and have a powerful equity component as well.
Thank you for bringing that up. It's so true, and activists and community developers all over the country are looking for models and opportunities and partners to be able to pursue that. And I think it really is appropriate for us to be pushing our journalists to make sure that despite the fact that people would like to make this a conversation about personalities, that we make it a conversation about policy. I sometimes I wish we could lower my journalists, because accountability is so elusive there. But if the journalists would start asking those questions and lifting up those, they just keep pushing it, we would be having a different conversation. And it's not too late. We're in the season.
You're
Good
next.
morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for the panel. My name is Kyra Jacobs. I work for proud work for EPA Region 1 in Boston. And my question is for Angela. My question is about equity. Something that I've noticed in my 15 years working in drinking water protection that's really coming to a head. I work with some of the best utilities in the country. And they are just the best at what they do. And just like all the water utilities all over the country, they're my heroes. What they do day in, day out for water treatment. And I'm seeing a trend where, because of what you're talking about, brown is in white, that work in a lot of low-income communities with, again, fantastic water suppliers and doing great work, supplying excellent water to their communities. And when I speak with the residents and I work with them, for example, community Lawrence, Massachusetts, lowest income per capita in the state. The citizens don't trust the water, even though we know, and they've had a chance to go into the water treatment plant. We ran a water boot camp for students last summer. And once the kids learn, and then they come back the next day, we've done a water taste test, and they understand. One of those young men said to me, I spoke to my mom last night, and now I recognize that it's part of my responsibility in our home, that we shouldn't be buying a lot of water because we can't afford it. And our water is safe, and we met Brian Payton, our commissioner, and he taught us how well our water is treated and it's safe. So could you speak to the equity issue about how do we educate folks that their water is safe and they don't need to buy all the water when they can't afford it?
I'm so glad that Joel has emphasized that we really are so fortunate to live in a country where there is so much water that is safe. Years ago, I was in an international setting and someone pointed out that the best water in the world, New York and California, and from that moment on, I never asked for bottled water again when I was in a restaurant. And sometimes I'm in places, people say, well, you really shouldn't be drinking that tap water. I said, well, this is my resolve. Yes, it's a bottled tap. I say tap. And we don't talk about it. When I say a few years ago, I'm telling you something that probably happened to me 13 to 14 years ago. All this time, for one period, I never thought about water at all. Then for another period, I thought about it and assumed I needed to do something to protect myself. When I found out that I did not, I instantly changed. And I tell people that all the time. So we do have a complicated situation that we're in. We need for people to understand their good fortune. They need for people to understand their good fortune. And we also need for people to understand, just like everything else in the United States of America, it is not universal. It is not universal. We need to have an aspiration that it will be universal. Where I thought you were going is I thought you were going to talk about the people who are not represented in the workforce in this area. I thought that's where you were going to go. So she didn't ask that question. I want to answer that anyway. And that is that in California, people have actually been talking and working on this issue in ways that made me really proud. Really looking at the fact that the baby boomers are retiring, those jobs are becoming available, and we can think about the future. We can invest in getting people ready now, and that is starting to happen, and I think that's really exciting. Working with community colleges, going into high schools, working in low-income communities of color, and saying there are some good jobs and a lot of them are going to be available. 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring, 40 million over the next decade. We got a lot of jobs coming on. Many of them are going to be in this area and other infrastructure areas. We need to be doing everything we can to make sure that that pipeline is full of the people we want to be full of.
I have a question right here. We'll get to you, I promise.
Hi, my name is Gary Collin with American Rivers, and I guess my question is around where does national environment really go? Because where do we get all our water? It comes from our rivers, our lakes, and our groundwater, and those have we see just as much impact as everything else when we manage our water. And if you look at where the sewage overflows that are discharging into the rivers, it's usually on where the flooding is running the rivers.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure.
There you go.
So where does the natural environment fit into this? The rivers and the lakes and the groundwater is where all this water comes from, and when we manage our rivers in a poor way, the sewage discharges going to the rivers, this all happens in the forest communities. The flooding on our rivers all happen in the forest communities. Where do the rivers and natural environment and source of water fit into this conversation?
I really think it needs to be right at the very center and heart of this conversation. We EPA, as many of you may know, issued the Clean Water Rule a little over a year ago. We just had the birthday of a rule that's in litigation right now. That's a rule that, kind of helped to clarify the scope of protections afforded by the Clean Water Act. And one of the things we always say about that rule is that the headwaters, and the source waters that are protected by that rule or covered by that rule account for the drinking water source for over 100 million Americans. So near a third of our drinking water supply is supplied by these areas that really need and deserve protection. And, not just there, but in a lot of these areas, one of the things we were talking about earlier, and I'm sure you're well aware of, this kind of slow-moving disaster of nutrient pollution in the United States, where we have over 16,000 water bodies, are impaired for nutrients, nitrogen, and phosphorus. We've got, NOAA and USGS coming out, today saying the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico will be about the size of Connecticut, 6,000 square miles. We've got that in our iconic estuaries all over the country, over 8,000 miles of rivers and streams impaired for nutrients. This is a challenge for drinking water, quality, imposing costs on communities, and huge consequences for aquatic life and these natural habitats that are one of the most treasured resources that this country has. So that conversation, I think, absolutely needs to be at the heart of our One Water conversation.
And that's why I go back to agriculture, because those nitrates that are in the drinking water, where is it coming from? It's coming largely from nitrate fertilizer runoff farms. And then farms not the bad guys, this is the structure they've been given, but if you were to switch to a drip irrigation system and use not just drippers for water, but drippers also for the nutrients, that's zero runoff problems. So it's a virtuous circle. It just keeps getting better and better for not just the farmer, but for society. We have to figure out a way to help those farmers get the equipment in their fields, and also for people who are, farmers tend to be poorer Americans. Think about, Cargill or San Juan Davis. We tend to have very poor people, and they're not going to spend $3,000 an acre to put drip irrigation in the fields unless we figure out a way to help them. It's in our interest to help them. It's not just because we want to help farmers, we want to help people of color. We want to do this because it's in our selfish interest. We have to make that case. Selfishness usually sells.
On that note, I think if there are more questions in the audience, my instructions are to stop now, just come up afterwards and ask. But can you join me in thanking our panelists?
All right, I'm going to get this on camera. All right, so we're still live. Hi, I'm Dr. Kat Schar, Water Citizen Media Foundation. And I want to address something to both you and Steph.
What is Water Citizen Media?
Water Citizen Media Foundation is a nonprofit media organization that is our mission. Our mission, Water Citizen Media Foundation, we're actually about to move out to California to work with Jim Tebow on a film on water and food security.
Yeah, wow.
Looking at security issues, looking at equity issues, looking at all of these issues.
Where are you based now?
Well, I just moved off of Capitol Hill.
Are we being filmed right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks for
all right.
Okay.
Sorry. And I absolutely, we've started Water Citizen Media Foundation for exactly the point that the two of you made up here. This idea that we cannot tell the stories of engineering. I have a PhD in civil engineering. Civil engineering is about taking science and technology and applying it to society. And every single engineering study, every single engineering report, they may not say it, but it takes into consideration policy, economics, equity, all those issues are in there. And it is our job in the media as storytellers to figure out, using all the technology, new media, using data visualization, using what we see in Discovery and documentaries to make that happen, to get that story out there. So
where are you filming?
So I don't see how we can say as media, nobody wants to hear this story because it's an engineering story.
Right. No, I wasn't saying, I was saying we need to frame it in a way that people will listen, That was my point, from a journalistic someone.
Well, and I do have a degree in journalism also.
So you know about, right.
I know, and it is our mission to make water sexy.
Right.
And that's what we do.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
all right.
It's nice
Thank
meeting
you.
Thank you.